So for our next part, we're going to talk now about weaning. This is an important stage for all children, even those who have a cow's milk protein allergy. For the child with a cow's milk protein allergy, their weaning diet needs to contain naturally milk-free foods, such as things like fruits and vegetables, and other protein sources such as meats, fishes, eggs, nuts and seeds, and other naturally milk-free foods. We also recommend going for foods that do not contain milk listed as an ingredient. So you might need to familiarise yourself with looking out for milk on the back of food products so that you know what you can and cannot give your child. Your dietitian may have given you some information on milk-free weaning. This is the leaflet that we use here, and in it contains many tips and pointers for following a milk-free diet whilst weaning, and it also contains some recipes. If you haven't already got this or an alternative, speak to your dietitian and what they might be able to support you with. As well as this, the child continues to need their specialist milk, be this mum's breast milk or their specialist infant formula. These generally should stay in place until the child is around about 1 year of age, at which point this can be reviewed. They can stay in place up to 2 years of age, and for breastfeeding can continue up to 5 years of age. The need for this will be reviewed by your dietitian, so discuss any questions that you might have. As well as these, it's important to make sure that the child continues to get good levels of calcium in their diets to meet their requirements. Plant-based milks can be a good source of calcium here, particularly where they are fortified. Fortified just means that they've got extra goodness added into them. When doing your shopping, have a look at the ones that are available in your supermarket, as many of them tell you on the front what they have added into them, such as these examples that we have with us here today. They might tell you that they have added calcium, iodine, and other goodness in them. If you can't see it on the front of the packet, have a look at the back, because they'll often tell you what is included on the back of the packet. Any plant-based milk can be given to a child as part of their diet, that is in form of added with cereals or when making up sauces. The exception to this, however, is rice milk. We advise that rice milk shouldn't be given to children until they are 5 years of age. This is just due to the trace levels of arsenic that might be found in these products. Not something to worry too much about, but just know that we would advise not until 5 years for this product. So now that we've spoken about the basics of weaning, we're going to go into things in a little bit more detail. What we need to talk about is making sure that the diet contains all the goodness that the child needs to be able to grow and do all the important development that is so necessary at this very early stage. So we need to make sure that the child continues to have as much carbohydrate and energy as they need. So these often come from the foods such as your pastas, rices, breads, and cereals. But also the things like proteins such as your meats, fishes, beans, pulses, nuts, and seeds. These give us the building blocks of everything that we need to grow. We also need to think about the things that might be smaller in our diet, but just as important, such as vitamins and minerals, and these come from an array of foods. So for the way of us making sure that the diet is nourishing, or basically just the way that we dietitians talk about a healthy and varied diet, is to do just that, to make sure that the child is given a variety of different foods to make sure they have a balanced diet. That's what we're after, making sure that the child on a milk-free diet doesn't have anything missing from what they need in their diet. As well as all of this, we need to make sure that the foods that you give your child don't contain milk listed as an ingredient. You can find this information by looking on the back of a product and looking on the ingredients list. By law, the 14 common allergens have to be listed and declared, and milk is one of these common 14 allergens. If the product does contain milk, this will be listed and printed in big chunky lettering in bold, in italics on a bit of a slant, or perhaps underlined. This is the manufacturer's way of highlighting this to you so that you can clearly see it. Unfortunately, sometimes these ingredients lists can be very small. So I would advise taking whatever you need to be able to read something when you go to the supermarket, be that your glasses, or perhaps even a magnifying glass at times, because they really can be quite small. There are some smartphone apps that can be available in helping to shop for a child on an allergy-free diet, and I would advise that you discuss this with your dietitian if that's something that you think might be of benefit to you. So now that we've talked about where you might find milk listed on a food product, let's talk about times that might be challenging. This might be, for instance, if you're out and about for the day, you're visiting someone who lives quite remotely, or just any time that you might not have easy access to a supermarket that might have some food that you could give to your child. If this is the case, what we would recommend doing is taking something along with you that you know you can safely give your child, so that you're not relying on a very small corner shop, for instance, who might have a very limited array of foods. As well as times that might be challenging, we also need to think about who might need to know about your child's cow's milk protein allergy. This can be anyone who is helping to care for your child. So it might be the other parent, it might be grandparent, it might be aunt, uncle, childminder, whoever might be helping to care for your child. It's important that they are kept up to date with what your child's condition is so that they have an understanding, what they can and cannot give the child on a milk-free diet, and also what they can do to help you manage their cow's milk protein allergy. As well as this, something that can be quite important and actually give us a lot of information is times where the child might accidentally get hold of something that contains cow's milk. Don't beat yourself up too much about this. If it happens, it happens. And sometimes, as I said, can give us some very important information. If your child has had something, say they've grabbed their sibling's biscuit that contains milk, and they have been fine and had no symptoms, that is a positive sign that they might have started to outgrow their milk allergy. If it is that the child has had a reaction to the food that they've eaten, what we do is we would just say that the child is not yet tolerating that level of milk that they've had. And what they should do is return to their milk-free diet, and we will come to introduction at a later point in life.
Great, so thank you very much, Kieran, for all that useful information about weaning. Hopefully our parents will have got a few good tips from that for weaning for milk-free children. And now I thought it might be good to just talk about some of the questions that we often get when we're running our group sessions.
Definitely. So a common question that we get asked as dietitians is that when parents can introduce some of the other common allergens into their child's diet.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you talked about those 14 common allergens that we talked about earlier on. And actually, it's good to try and introduce those during the weaning process. So essentially, if you leave it for longer than a year, so if your child's older than 12 months, the evidence shows that they're a little bit more likely to have more of a severe reaction. So it's good to try and get these foods in during that first sort of part of the weaning process. So how would you do that? Well, you'd probably want to introduce them one at a time. So you could think about things, for example, like some well-cooked scrambled egg. You could think about things like some soy yogurt. Maybe for cashews, you want to use a dairy-free pesto, for example. You could use some tuna fish. This one here is bone-free and it's in spring water, so that's a good choice to go for. You've got things like nut butters that you can use, ground almonds, and here we have tahini, which is really useful for sesame. So what we'd want to do is introduce them and then leave a 3-day gap before you try the next one. So let's say, for example, you try scrambled egg on a Monday. You probably don't want to be trying another food until a Thursday. Now, if you know that your child has actually tolerated that really well, that's fantastic, and you want to probably keep that food in their diet a couple of times a week from there onwards, and that just helps that child to keep that tolerance for that new food going. All of these foods, ideally when we're sort of introducing them, what kind of texture would you recommend?
We'd recommend making sure that you don't include anything which could potentially pose a choking hazard. So with things like your nuts, go for the smooth nut butters or ground nuts rather than going for the whole nuts or the crunchy nuts, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So another question I sometimes hear is, what should you do if your child has had a reaction to one of these foods?
That's definitely a very good question, and one that we need to make sure that we do take seriously. If a child has had a reaction and it's one that you feel requires medical attention, we advise that the first thing you should do is seek that attention. So be that through contacting your GP or your healthcare professional, or if serious enough, phoning 111 or 999 to get that support. Once it is that the child's reaction has calmed down and they're back to their normal happy self, what we'd recommend doing is getting in contact with your dietitian, because they might be able to give you an action plan or refer you perhaps to a specialist clinic which might be able to do further testing to give you more information about what reaction we might have seen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Definitely. Another question that we often get as well is that when parents are going through weaning, they want to make sure their child is getting everything they need, and therefore they wonder about what vitamins and mineral supplements they should give their child.
Very good. So the Department of Health actually recommends that all breastfed children receive vitamin drops. So that would include vitamins A, C and D. And also that children who are formula fed up until a year old, if they're having less than 500 millilitres of formula a day, they also want to be on those vitamins. And then all children between 1 year and 5 years ideally are also on vitamins A, C and D. Definitely. Now, if finances are a bit tricky, you can look at the Healthy Start vouchers that are available, and they have vitamins for children between 0 and 5 years old. So those can be really, really helpful. Also for mums who are breastfeeding or pregnant, we recommend 10 micrograms of vitamin D per day. And those can be purchased from large supermarkets or from a pharmacy of some sort.
So now that we've finished that section, we're going to move on to the next part, which is the milk reintroduction via the milk ladder.